Okay, so in the last video concerning blockchain, we discussed blockchain 0.0, or literally the conception and birth of blockchain. And the original purpose of blockchain was to find a way to timestamp or fingerprint electronic documents, to give those documents a unique identifier known as a fingerprint, or modern day known as a hash, and to be able to sign the document cryptographically and create trust without a third party, and keep it transparent and easily verified by anyone, anywhere, at any time. So as the internet was coming into fruition and we were in Internet 1.0 and things began to become digitalized, the problem that we were facing, or the issue that was out there, was how do you uniquely identify every single digital document? And how do you do this without a third party? Because we already have the ability to uniquely identify a document using a third party, but what the issue was is how do you decentralize this process and uniquely identify every single digital document that comes into existence? And again, the concept of blockchain was born in 1989 and was implemented in 1990, and we went over that white paper from the Surety company, who also posted the blockchain data in the Sunday paper of the New York Times. So with the creation of that white paper and the creation of the company called Surety, we ended up with blockchain technology. And in so doing, we now had a way to take any digital document that comes into existence and create a fingerprint or a hash that uniquely identifies that document. No matter how many copies of that document exist, they will all have the exact same unique identifier because it's the exact same document. You change any bit anywhere in that document, whether it's a picture, a letter, or any other thing, metadata, or anything in that document, and then it ends up with a completely different unique identifier because it's a unique document. Something got changed from the original. Therefore, all that has to be done is you go into the blockchain and see what the original was, and you can determine whether or not you're dealing with a fraud of some kind, or you're actually dealing with a legitimate, uniquely identified document that you're trying to purchase or move or do whatever you're trying to do with that document. The implementation of this created a decentralized digital registry. So we had the internet, in which you had basically decentralization. Anybody could create a server anywhere, upload data to it, and anyone anywhere could go and read that data on the internet. But as time went forward and we started to get into this Internet 2.0, we ended up with these centralized servers, these centralized companies, where basically the vast majority of servers that are out there are owned by Amazon, right? And other companies, but the vast majority are owned by Amazon itself. It's centralizing those databases. What the original blockchain and the original bringing forth the blockchain did was it actually decentralized those databases in the process of actually taking that database and putting it onto this computer, and then another person come along and they decide, okay, I'm going to download that database onto my computer, and I'll also verify that the database is correct and all this stuff, and as the blocks get added, it'll be stored on my computer just the same as your computer, and then it'll be at this place and at that place and at this location and that location. All these computers all over the world are all have a complete copy of the entire blockchain, or the complete copy of the database. So you don't have one centralized server or one centralized location that can be burnt down, bombed, hacked, or any other type of thing that could happen. It can no longer happen because it's no longer in a central location, but on tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of computers all over the earth. And so you cannot just take it down by taking down the central location. You'd have to take down every single computer that holds that distributed digital database or digital registry. So now at this point in time, we now have the ability to create a distributed digital database, or a registry of uniquely identified digital documents. That was the creation and the birth of blockchain. Now, since then, and between the time that that was created to the time that Bitcoin gets created, which is basically blockchain 2.0, and we're going to cover that in the next video. But in between the original blockchain 0.0, the birth of blockchain, and Bitcoin, blockchain 1.0, you had multitudes of companies such as Target and Walmart and many other companies that began to use blockchain. Okay. Now at this point we don't have cryptocurrency. We simply have a decentralized digital registry, or a decentralized digital database that anybody can access, and it's open records, it's transparent, it's immutable, all these different things. So if Walmart creates a database for their products and creates it in a decentralized digital registry database, in other words, they create a blockchain, then all their different individuals that they interact with, say they're trying to get coffee, then when the farmer actually produces the coffee, the actual coffee beans, and sells them to whoever they sell them to, that gets logged onto the blockchain. Then once it is sold to them, now the ownership is with them, and that's on the blockchain. And then whatever they do, maybe they're going to crush the coffee beans and turn it into coffee grounds. So they do that, and then they sell the coffee grounds to, say, some distributor that's going to distribute it across the face of the earth, and then that goes into the blockchain. Then as it's distributed across the face of the earth, then as the Walmart comes along to pick up that coffee grain to move it to their distribution center, that is logged into the blockchain. And then from there, it goes from the distribution center to the actual Walmart store, again logged in the blockchain. So now when you go to Walmart and you scan an item such as an orange, you can find out how long ago it was picked. You can determine what farmer farmed it, grew it, and brought it to market, what market it went to, and you can trace the entire history of that orange or whatever product you're looking at, because it has been digitalized, been given a unique identifier, and it's placed into the blockchain. And now we can go and find the entire history of that blockchain, of that product, that orange, all the way back to its mother tree. Okay, so this has a multitude of implications, and blockchain can be privatized. It can be a private blockchain, meaning it's only within the company itself, or it can be a public blockchain in which anybody has access to it, anybody can view it, it's completely transparent, all these things. Now a private blockchain then is a blockchain that is within a company, and so you may or may not have access to see what is in it, but whatever information in that distributed database that you need, you will be given rights to access that in order to determine what you need to do in order to input more information into the blockchain as the product works its way to Walmart. So you have Walmart's blockchain, and all of these farmers and companies and distribution centers and all these other things can all access that blockchain and update that blockchain as to where that product's moving and what's being done to that product and who's involved with that and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so but that's they also have a private side in there where the vendors and all the different people cannot access certain information because it's specifically only for Walmart itself and not for the movement of products and all these kinds of things. So if you have a private blockchain, it really is not a blockchain, because a blockchain is a distributed, decentralized digital registry. That's what it is. So if it's not distributed across multitudes of computers, and then it's not truly blockchain. It is blockchain. It's the private version of blockchain, but with private blockchains you can create centralization and all these other different issues that will arise in due time for these various companies that are using the private blockchains for the improper purposes. But now that we have that foundational blockchain, that 0.0, that birth, that conception of blockchain, in which we have a decentralized digital registry, a decentralized digital database distributed amongst millions of computers, the technology from that point forward could move onward. Okay, we now have the actual technology called blockchain, and again, multitudes of companies have implemented this blockchain, including the United States Post Office. and many others. Okay, so but we'll save that information for later videos. What we have to do in this video now, before we can move into blockchain 1.0, is we have to understand money. What is money exactly? It's not what most people think that it is. So originally, we had tribes. If you believe in your Bible, then you know that you had Adam and Eve, and then from Adam and Eve, all these births and all these tribes come together, and you have all these tribes located all over the earth, right? It's just they're just spreading out and subduing the earth basically. But you were in a tribe or a local small community in which people gathered together, and it was a very simple process of you would mentally keep this quote unquote ledger or registry mentally. So say Fred over here comes and asks, hey man, I need some logs from my fire. Can I get 10 logs from you? And I'll get you 10 logs later down the road. Right now it's really cold. I can't get. No one's out getting wood. You have it. Can I have it? And so you give him, say, 10 pieces of wood, and mentally you'd keep track that, hey, Fred owes me 10 pieces of wood, and then this other person comes along and says, hey, I need 3 buckets of water, and so mentally you'd remember that, hey, this individual owes me 3 buckets of water. If I ever need water, I can go to him, get my 3 buckets, etc., etc., etc. So you had this ledger that was all mental in its capacity. And basically money at that time was just trading. What I need this, you have it, and I have this and you need it, let's just make a trade. Or I need this but I don't have anything to give to you, I owe you this amount if you give it to me, right? And you just you kept a mental ledger, or you would have other witnesses around to verify, so that later down the road if you need to get that stuff back, you have witnesses where you have 2 or 3 witnesses that prove a thing. So, but as time went forward and we had villages or tribes that were near others, right, other tribes and other villages, and there was close proximity, they needed something that everyone in both communities or both tribes could agree upon that had value and was stable. So the concept that you have these 2 villages side by side, and they want to interact and make trade between one another, they needed something out there that was stable and had value that they could use to make transactions. So say this community over here basically needed some clothing, and this community over here didn't really need anything from that community, so they needed something that had value and was stable that they could transact in order to purchase that clothing from that community over there, because because the community didn't have anything to offer back to them, right? So you'd have to have some kind of tangible substance in order to make a transaction, and this is where the concept of money comes in. And this particular item, whatever it is that has both value and is stable, is what became known as commodity money. And back in the day, there were many different forms that this took place in. For example, in ancient Rome, they used salt. Now, this is ancient Rome. This isn't modern day Rome that we read about in history books and that kind of stuff. Ancient Rome used salt as their commodity money. Salt was their form of money. You want this wood, you give me 2 pounds of salt, right? Oh, you want this particular herb, it's going to cost you a half a bag of salt, right? So they use salt as the commodity money. The Aztecs, they used cacao beans. The Tibet, they used yak dung. Literally dung, poop from the yaks. In Fiji, they were using whale teeth. In ancient or Africa and China, they were using shells as their commodity money. Ancient times, they were using crops and animals. When you look in old ancient Israel and Egypt and those kinds of things, they were using crops and animals. Things like grains, metals, ivory, rare stones, leather, fish, mules, rocks, anything that embodied the 5 characteristics of commodity money. So what are these 5 characteristics of commodity money? Number 1, it had to be scarce or scarce. It had to be recognizable. It had to be divisible. In other words, it had to be able to be denominated into smaller units or smaller pieces. It had to be fungible. So you could substitute one piece for another piece of equal value. You could take $1 and substitute it with 4 quarters, for example. Right? Had to be fungible. Had to be you had to be able to substitute. It had to be portable and basically easily carryable or transportable. Okay, so scarcity, recognizable, divisible, fungible, and portable is what made commodity money, and these took all sorts of various different forms. But there was a problem with commodities, okay, and that is that a durable commodity money can run into serious problems and serious trouble. For example, ancient Rome using salt as their commodity money. What happens then when all of a sudden you come across a brand new salt flat that you didn't know exists? Then all of a sudden the value of your salt has significantly depreciated or devalued itself, because all of a sudden you've got a lot more salt than you were ever aware of originally. And so now you got all this extra salt coming into the cyclical nature of that commodity, and so now it has been significantly devalued. The other things about it is, for example, say you had your salt stacked up and it rained, right? And the rain washed all your salt away. Now it was non-usable salt, right? It's lost its flavor, it's lost its purpose, it's lost its use. What happens if all of your animals died off? And different things. What if you couldn't find any seashells or whale's teeth? Different things. Or all of a sudden there was a massive market where whale after whale after whale after whale was being killed, and there was an overabundance of whale teeth. So you had this durability issue of commodity money. Well, this then led to about 2,500 years ago, about 2,500 years ago, the first metal coins were minted in China. And so we had these metal coins that came into existence. And we see, like in the Bible, where you're dealing with gold and silver in Israel and all these things about 2,500 years ago. And the durability of the commodity money became astronomically potent, because now all of a sudden when we look back in time, we can find coins from civilizations that we have no other trace of their existence. But the coins survived time. Their durability is absolutely impressive in nature. It can endure for generations and generations and decades and so forth and so on, go on for a very long time. So then at this point, coins themselves became the medium of exchange of an earth-wide civilization, allowing for the trade of items from any people anywhere to any other people anywhere on an earth-wide scale. And so you had an earth-wide civilization was literally born from the conception of coinage. The problem with coinage is that with coins came controllers of the issuing of the coin. Now, this back in those days was usually given over to the government, and into the those days, back in the original days of these coinages, that meant that it was given over to kings and emperors, this issuing of currency or issuing of coinage. So the commodity money is now this coin, right? Instead of being salt or teeth or rocks or whatever, it's a coin is now what we use on an earth-wide scale in order to transfer goods back and forth between people. And minting coins in a stable and forecastable way meant stability and growth in the economies of all the various different nations. So as long as it was legit and forecastable, you could forecast out how many is going to be minted and what's going to happen with that money, and it was stable and all these things. You had economic growth, like unbelievable growth. Now, in the original days of China and Turkey and the Roman Empire, etc., the coins that were minted by these kings and emperors were smooth on their edges. And they didn't have the modern, what you see, these little ripples on the edge of the quarter or on the penny or on the lire or on the whatever currency you're working with. They have these rippled edges on the edge. And the reason why is that people would cut off a little bit of the coin edge, in order to either eventually accumulate enough to mint their own coin and become richer that way, or to devalue the coin itself. And a lot of times the kings, through taxes, would themselves take 1/8 of the edge of a coin off of a coin, and that would be the collection of a tax back in these days. And this clipping of 1/8 of the edge by the kings and emperors is what financed the building of castles and military campaigns and hidden agendas and all these other different types of things. Now, this eventually led to kings minting coins with lesser metals than gold or silver, and became known as debasement. So rather than having a 100% gold coin or a 100% silver coin, the kings and emperors began to mint these coins with a lesser valued metal, and so it would be 80% silver and 20% something else. And this process of devaluation started taking place in that way, rather than clipping off the edges of the coins. But the problem then became that if no one can trust the gold or silver content of your coin, how can you trade with any other nation if no one can trust your coin, because you keep changing up the percentages of actual legitimate silver, actual legitimate gold, or actual legitimate platinum, or actual legitimate whatever is supposed to be in that coin? Well, the international merchants of the time found a solution to this problem. Another issue comes up, we find another solution here. And that is that a person's debt itself has value. It can be treated or traded or transferred. This debt can be, right? So whenever these IOUs came from a reputable, trusted source, they can be used as a form of money, and this led to paper money. And this paper money is no longer based on substance, but rather on someone's promise to pay. So basically what these international merchants or bankers, which merchants become bankers in due time, but what these international merchants are basically doing is say you have this individual over here in the United States, right? And he goes over to this international merchant or this banker or this third party or this central party that is trusted by both parties or a multitude of parties, but is trusted, and says, look, I need 1,000 barrels of oil, and I'll give you 50 gold coins for that 1,000 barrels of oil. So the promise to pay that 50 gold coins is put onto a piece of paper known as an IOU. I owe you 50 gold coins for 1,000 barrels of oil. However, meanwhile, that same middleman or that same central trusted authority or that middle person there goes out and with one of his other merchants that he's dealing with and trading with and stuff, he says, look, I'm going to give you 50 gold for so much wine, right? Because I need wine. So the middleman takes that IOU of 50 gold that he's getting from the U.S. guy and says, here's an IOU that I owe you 50 gold coins. And all that's happening here is that the piece of paper, the IOU, is what is moving, not the gold itself, or not the coin itself. Now, the reason that all of this works is because everyone trusted the middleman or the central man. This gave birth to national banks and was what gave birth to church and state, as the middlemen in the Roman Empire were the pontiffs and the popes. So the merchants, the international merchants, the banks, soon learned that people would posit gold, not deposit gold. They would posit gold, and the gold would often just sit within the bank itself or within the international merchant's facility, collecting dust, and everyone preferred the paper IOU to trade with or to buy with. They didn't want to carry around the heavy gold, and so they would posit the gold into the international merchant or the international banker or whatever you want to call them, and they would receive the IOU that you could redeem back for gold at any given point in time. And so they would take the IOU and they would go out and make trade with the IOU, the paper money, and they would carry the paper money around rather than the heavy substance that would cause your pants to fall down to the ground, because it's just gold and silver. It's just extremely heavy, and if you've got 20, 30 gold or silver coins in your pocket, you can't keep your pants on even with a belt, unless you just got a really big butt, you know. But even so, it was difficult to carry these weights and these stuff. The portability of gold and silver was just too much, and people preferred these IOUs, these pieces of paper, and they would trade with these pieces of paper over the gold, and the gold would just literally collect dust in the facility. So these international bankers, or these international merchants, then realized they could loan out the gold that was just sitting there collecting dust, and require the amount loaned out plus interest. Everything kept on a ledger by itself, so that everything was kept track of. You know, you want this gold, I'll give you the gold. I'll give you these IOUs for the gold, and you can go about doing what you want, and we'll keep it on a ledger. You put this much in, I gave you this much out in IOUs. You can bring your IOUs in and get the gold for it, right? Well, as this happened, as long as people trusted the banker, they would end up trusting the paper, because all they had to do was take the paper and turn it in to redeem it in gold or silver or whatever substance. So more and more private paper money began to circulate and rival the coinage of the various empires and kingdoms. The power of issuing and controlling money started to slip away from the quote-unquote rulers of the country, and they could not tax or debase this private money. Only the goldsmith and the bankers could do that, because they are the ones that are issuing out the IOUs in the place of the kingdom or empire's money or coinage. Now, while all that was going on, we entered into a time when nations wanted to quote-unquote rule the world. Literally, that's what they wanted to do. And we had wars, and wars required funding. And the yearly tax of the people, the yearly income tax, wasn't enough that they needed. So they ended up needing another way to fund the wars and borrowing against future taxes of their people. And this led to the invention of of government bonds. And this is where government bonds come into place. They are borrowing based on future taxation of the people. So now remember that during this time period, for these governments, these empires and kings and stuff, to issue government bonds, the controlling and issuing of money was now being done to the goldsmiths and the rich merchant families. And these rich merchant families were becoming, quote-unquote, the banks. So the loans that the governments got in order to create these bonds had to come from the rich merchant banking families and the goldsmiths, who now controlled the issuing of this paper money. And this then created the birth of sovereign debt and deficit spending. In other words, privately owned central banks now controlled nations. Wars were now funded through the families that owned the central banks, and everything was owed to them. The militaries of nations were used to enforce the money owed to these families, or to these banks, or to these international merchants. In 1781 through 1907, U.S. money was issued by the Congress itself, just as it is told to be done in the Constitution, and it was backed by gold. Then there was Jekyll Island. The politicians and banking families create the Federal Reserve Bank, and a privately owned central bank outside of the USA is born. Then came 1929, the Great Depression. It changed monetary policy worldwide, and the Federal Reserve would print money to bring us up out of that depression, and because they wanted to print this money, they needed gold in order to fire up the mints. And so President Roosevelt, issued executive order for all American citizens to sell their gold to the Federal Reserve at a fixed price or go to prison. The Fed also offered far, far, far higher prices for the gold of other countries and money, and gold for other countries, and at this point many of the various nations out there jumped on that offer, and gold began to flow into the United States, or into the Federal Reserve, a private entity outside of the United States. It flowed into the Federal Reserve, and the dollars began to spread across the entirety of the earth. Then World War II devastated every major economy except what? The U.S. economy. The U.S. military and industrial complex emerged as the global financial superpower. The U.S. dollar became the most stable and trusted currency. Other countries pegged their currency to the dollar, and the dollar again is a fiat currency, it's a paper money. And at the time, any of these nations could still redeem those dollars for gold. Okay, at the time that all this was taking place. And at the time, the U.S. owned more than 1/2 of the world's gold reserves. Dollars flowed, and countries started debasing their currencies, printing more of their currency than they had in gold, and then they started complaining, saying, you know, hey, we want to redeem our gold for dollars and all this stuff, and there was this major issue started to arise between all the nations, and they wanted their gold returned for their dollars, and this massive mess was developing. So then in 1971, President Nixon basically severed the United States currency from the gold standard, so it is no longer pegged to the gold. And never again could anyone at any place or any time demand gold in exchange for the U.S. dollar. So now the U.S. dollar, no longer backed by gold, no longer backed by silver or any other thing, it was literally backed by the full faith of the United States government. In other words, the U.S.'s future and the world's future now literally hinged upon a single word: trust. And that's how we got to where we are today concerning money. So money is just that thing which is of value that you can use to transact between two people. But this whole process of commodity money and debt money became centralized. And this centralized money was debt money. And so what would happen is you would go in today, instead of positing money into a bank, what you do is you deposit or give over your money to the bank. Once you deposit your money into the bank, you no longer own that money. The bank owns that money. So let's say you deposit $100 into any given bank. The bank then is required to keep 3% of that on hand. That's it, 3%. So they take $97 and say another person comes in, say Jessica comes in and wants to borrow money. Well, they have $100 and they have to keep $3 or 3% of that in the bank, right? So they can take $97 and loan that out to Jessica. So Jessica receives $97 that doesn't exist because your account still says that you have $100. The bank has reserved $3 of that $100, but has lent out $97 of your $100 out to Jessica. Now Jessica goes and takes that money and does what she does, and then that money ends up in another bank. So her $97 ends up in a bank, right? They have to keep 3% of that. So $2.91 of that is kept at the bank. But they can take the other 97% of that, that is $94, and loan it out to somebody else. So they loan out the $94 to somebody else. They go and they deposit it into a bank. The bank has to keep, again, 3% of that, so $2.82, and can loan out 97% of it, of that $94. So now you have $91.27, basically, being loaned out to another individual. And that person eventually deposits in the bank, and the bank has to keep 3% of that $91.27. So you got $2.74 that the bank has to hold, and they lend out $88 and some odd cents, 53 cents, right? And then they lend that out to somebody, and they go deposit that in the bank, and then they have to keep 3%. So now you're at $2.65 that the bank has to keep, but they lend out $85.87 about, right? And so your $100 that you deposited in the bank is now $555 and some change, because money is literally being created out of thin air. So when you took your $100 in there, they created $97 out of thin air and handed it and loaned it off to somebody else. And then they keep 3% of that. When it hits the bank, they keep 3% of it and loan out 97%. This is what is called fractional reserve banking. All new money is debt, period, with interest owed on it that is not being printed. And so you are in a perpetual debt money system nowadays, all controlled by central entities, central banking entities. And these central banking entities are controlled by the merchants, the international merchants, which are families that control the various international banks. And none of the international banks have anything at all to do with the country that they are the international bank of. In other words, the money that you think is in your bank account isn't there at all, or any way, form, or fashion. 3% of it is. And if everyone went to the bank and withdrew the money into cash, it would become absolutely evident and revealed to the world that there is nowhere near enough dollars, and the whole thing would absolutely collapse. It never existed in the first place, the money that is being lent out over and over and over again. Your $100 deposited into the bank became $555 that nobody put into the bank. All they did was change some ones and some zeros and do some additions and subtractions on a ledger in that centralized authority or that centralized entity. And when people get to the point where they cannot pay for the loans that they are getting out, foreclosure takes place. In effect, stealing the property, that is the house, the car, furniture, whatever it is that they bought on loan. The banks end up owning absolutely everything. And so you have this massive fraud that takes place on a consistent, daily, continual basis. And all of this is being done with digital currency that has no limit. It's limitless. They can print without end. They can add ones and zeros without end. They can keep their ledger balance perfectly, and they can go on perpetually forever. They can print out quadrillions of zillions of billions of gajillions of dollars. It would not matter. It can go on perpetually forever. There's no accountability. And all of this is done in secrecy, and the people that use these dollars and these banking systems have no idea, no clue whatsoever what is happening. To give you an idea of how bad inflation really is in the United States, let's think about something. Today, the U.S. owes $400 billion in interest to its creditors. We have become the debtor because we have a private international bank that has nothing to do with the United States issuing and controlling our money. And it's limitless how much they can print, how much they can create. It's without limit. U.S. dollar has deflated by 98% since 1933. Right? The U.S. dollar is worth 2 cents today. That's what the value of a U.S. dollar is 2 cents. It has deflated 98% since the Federal Reserve came into existence. Inflation is far more heavy of a tax than income taxes themselves. Taxes you pay only one time, but inflation is 2%. Inflation of 2% means that every single year you lose 2% of the value of money that you had at the beginning of that year. In other words, if we had a 2% inflation today, then next year the dollar would only be worth 98 cents, or only have 98 cents worth of buying power. To give you an example and to let it hit home with you what this means, an example would be this. In 1930, $1 bought 16 loaves of bread. Today, that same dollar will not even buy one loaf of bread. It has depreciated or devalued 98% since 1913. So, to keep this video as short as possible, this is how money has come to be what money is today. Money has never been gold or silver. Money has always been something that has inherently 5 characteristics. It has to be scarce, it has to be recognizable, has to be divisible, has to be fungible, has to be portable. The US dollar fits all of those things, but the problem with the US dollar is that it is 100% centralized. And all currencies of all countries are 100% centralized. It is controlled by a central entity. And these central entities can control politics and governments and do any number of things that they want to do, including controlling people, including controlling corporations, and any other thing that they want to do, because it is centralized in those one single entities for each of the given nations. And all of these entities are controlled by the banking or international merchant families. So in effect, we're still dealing with commodity money to this day in a digital format. The problem with the modern day digital formatted money is that it is without limit. They can print and create out of thin air forever, unlimited for eternity, and just keep inflating, and next thing you know, the U.S. dollar is going to be worth, negative $3, negative $50, negative $2,000, negative, so forth and so on. And the problem that we're having is that we are trusting in centralized authorities that do not have the interest of mankind or people in general in their minds or hearts. It's all about, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And we have given this control, which is supposed to be given to the governments to keep everything stable and proper, over to the centralized banking entities. And so the databases are basically in these centralized entities, the Federal Reserve in the United States and other central banks in the various other nations. Nobody has a copy of anything that's going on with any of this printing of money or reduction of money or any other thing, and so nobody has any idea how many dollars even exist on the earth. To this day, nobody has any idea at all how many exist. There is no transparency, and they can manipulate it any way that they want to, and they can do whatever it is that they want to do, and nobody is going to be any the wiser. In fact, people are going to suffer more and more as they can buy less and less with the same amount of money, as they try to hold on to that money, and it devalues more and more and more. And this is the situation that brought about blockchain 2.0 and Bitcoin. And so in the next video we will go into Bitcoin, but before we got into Bitcoin, we had to understand what is money. Money is not gold and silver. Money is not cattle. It's not grain. It's not salt. It's not any of these things. It is something that is scarce, recognizable, divisible, fungible, portable, and can be used as a medium of exchange in order to buy and trade items between nations, between people, between anything. And so a new concept had to come into existence, and in order for Bitcoin to come into existence, blockchain had to first come into existence. And so the original birth of blockchain 0.0, the surety company, and the digital fingerprinting of digital documents was a critical step toward changing the banking industry. But if we don't have an understanding of money and what's going on with money, then we can never understand the need or the power of blockchain 2.0 or cryptocurrency or Bitcoin. So hopefully at this point you have a complete understanding of how money has been used from the past to the present, and how all of this came about, and how this centralized control is the most evil thing that can possibly take place on this earth. And it's unaccountable. There's no way to verify anything, and it's literally in the hands of bankers, whether people rise or fall, starve or prosper, and all these other different things, and for absolutely no reason at this point, because we have the technology to undo that or to disrupt that, and it is being disrupted. And this is why they're coming out against it with all their might and strength, and saying, Bitcoin is used by pedophiles and used by this group of people and drug dealers and blah 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 blah, right? Because they know that it is a massive threat to them. And so we'll get into blockchain 2.0 or Bitcoin in the next video. Father, bless each and every single one of you that come along to watch this video. I pray that it has blessed you and helped you to understand the processes that is money, and where we are today with money, and so that we can understand the issue that arose that created Bitcoin. And we'll catch you guys in the next video.